So in the morning we had session on the Gita, and then on the Divine Mother, and now very naturally we are going on to the Yoga of Sri Aurobindo, which is so vast and infinite that it is not only difficult but sometimes dangerous to speak about the Yoga of Mother and Sri Aurobindo, because it moves along many lines, advances along many paths, in many ways. There is not one process. There are many, and it also moves when there is no process. In one of the letters of Sri Aurobindo, he writes, "There is no method in this yoga except to take the mother's name and mine." What a wonderful simplicity of yoga. But I was very happy to hear Dina talk. First, I could catch up a little bit on the Mahadev episodes, and it was good to see one more fan. And it's so lovely to hear about the rising Shakti, about the Divine Mother's work going on, so many of her children. And especially the perceptiveness with which she has differentiated between how the inner truth of harmony and unity of Mahalakshmi manifests in the most superficial form through the money power. I think yesterday we were just talking about that. And also how things that happen on the subtle planes, they affect earth, and vice versa. That is how the Vedas put it. That human life is a sacrifice, and in the Vedas there is a sacrifice that man makes to the gods, and in return gods fulfill him. So there was a two-way up and down. So what happens on earth, that has an influence in the other worlds, and what happens in the other worlds has an influence upon earth. Because I think yesterday or day before yesterday, Narad had read out from Savitri, all that transpires on earth and all beyond are part of an illimitable plan. It's a whole single movement. So we see this human quest for truth, for light, for God, for freedom, for immortality, for terrestrial perfection, since the age of the Vedas and even before that. Someone, I think, was referring to the pre-Abrahamic tradition. There is also a pre-Vedic tradition, and the mother speaks about it. Only thing is, the Vedas have documented it with such details and such many-sidedness, and despite all the mixtures that have come later on, even some slokas have got lost bodily, still they have preserved something of that truth of aspiration, and this is our common inheritance. When we speak about human unity, which is one of the subjects that came up, the way for human unity is to go back to our common inheritance. Physically, we all inherit the same earth, the same environment, the same atmosphere. And inwardly, we all inherit the same aspiration, essentially the same aspiration. And all these distinctions of religion and traditions, they have all come in between. And they will go away as man advances, because they were only meant as scaffoldings for our purposes. The Gita appears not only in the moment of individual crisis of Arjuna, as we were referring to in the morning, but also at a time of collective crisis of humanity. It was an age when the Kshatriya clan especially was full of the arrogance, and they believed that they are so strong, powerful, they ruled the earth, and they could just do anything. It was that kind of an age. At the same time, the Brahmins, who were supposed to be the givers of light, had lost the truth of the Vedas and the Upanishads, And they were engaging only in the external rituals, karm kand, Vedavad, as the Gita puts it. So, as we were referring to the story of Sati and Shiva in the morning, the Sati had disappeared, the spirit had disappeared, and only the form was remaining. Now, when Sati disappears and only the form remains, that means the spirit or the truth has disappeared and only an external form remains. Then God Himself descends to destroy it. And that is why we see in Gita, in the grand cosmic vision of the Godhead, we see this side is put forward in the front. There is, of course, the other side. Sri Aurobindo refers to that in Essays on the Gita. And always in the heart of Krishna as the destroyer, as he appears, Kala, there is the Vishnu form, and it's embedded but hidden inside. That's why when Arjuna says, too much for me to behold, when he says, behold, pashyami, look, behold my form. And when he sees, he is shaken to bits. Arjuna, the great warrior, who sends shivers down the spine of great warriors. And he is shaken. And he says that, I am shivering with fear. I can't behold this form. It's amazing that he who gives Ananda is inducing fear. And the secret lies in this. There is a very nice phrase in the Upanishads that he who gives Abhaya, his vision gives Bhaya in the heart of everything that is small, everything that is stuck in a narrow groove. And at that point of time, Arjuna is totally as if closed in that groove where he is worried about family, clan, this, that, and that's a form which is tremendous, powerful. On one side, he is full of beatific visions, full of the garlands which are full of fragrance, everything. But what is put in front is Kalosmi Bhava Lokshay Krit Pravaddo. He asks, who are you? He says, I am Time the Destroyer. Why have I come here on the battlefield? I have come to destroy these peoples. Lokashay, the worlds. This is something very interesting. They are two in one. Gauri and Kali, the names itself are so beautiful. They are both one. When Gauri steps behind, puts forward Kali, the Divine Mother takes this form of ruthless destruction. Because only by destruction can the new creation come. That line in Savitri, he felt in destruction, creation's hasty pace, and hell as a shortcut to heaven's gate. So humanity needs to pass through that time to time, series of crises. So if we see Gita appearing at a time of collective crisis. So Krishna, through Arjuna, was revealing a profound, not just a truth for one person. It is a gospel of synthesis. All the material that was available at that time, all the truths of Sankhya, Yoga, Vedanta, Sri Krishna synthesizes it. And he presents it to humanity through the agency of Arjuna. And that's why Gita is a great synthesis of all this whole line of evolution, Vedantic line of evolution. But as Sri Aurobindo says in one of his letters, Veda and Vedanta are one side of the truth. Tantra is the other side. And the other side complements this one. And Veda and Vedanta are incomplete without the Tantra, without the aspect of the Divine Mother. This is the very first thing which is new and unique in Sri Aurobindo's yoga. Of course, once again we see Sri Aurobindo appearing at another kind of crisis. I think we spoke about it on the first day, so I'll not go into details. But if you look 100 years back, all the forces, whether it be Darwinian way of understanding evolution, whether it be Freudian way of understanding human psychology, where he looks at human psychology as something, human beings as something which is an extension of the dark realms of netherworlds, all that is sublime and beautiful is nothing but a gloss over of the grotesque. This is that, in one sense, that whole Freudian psychology can be summarized at. And where world is seen only as matter, at that age Sri Aurobindo appears. Once again we see 100 years back the entire truth of Veda, Vedanta, Tantra disintegrated into forms and institutions which have lost the spirit, the truth. And they are in such grotesque forms they have emerged that he has to once again, on one side, destroy the form, liberate the truth inside, and give it in a new form to us. So this is one side of Sri Aurobindo's work, which we see in the Arya, where he once again gives to mankind the truth in the Vedas, the truth of essays on the Gita, the truth of the Upanishads, restores them to their original glory, not the way they were understood during 100 years back, totally. And even now, something of that continues to prolong itself. The old world continues to exist, where once again we have all these Swamijis and Pandits explaining the Vedas as pure karma kanda, as pure rituals, as externalities, and therefore, but this is gone. This is not going to continue. This is not going to last for long. Human consciousness will advance and reject it. It is just impossible that the advancing human consciousness for long will suffer God to remain confined in a temple or a church or a mosque. It's just impossible. Because any person who is even a little conscious and thinking, leave aside spiritual and all these are big words, will find it ridiculous that, God is confined to that space and outside I can just, life can be, or he's happy simply with these externalities. He needs to know the deeper meaning, purpose, sense, the truths behind these. So Sri Aurobindo comes and liberates that. And because he wrote so extensively on the Vedas, the Gita, and all these great scriptures, the Upanishads, so many people began to believe that what Sri Aurobindo's yoga is basically nothing, the same thing like the yoga of the Gita or the Veda or the Vedanta. This is a great error. There are letters of Sri Aurobindo clarifying this. It draws from the Vedanta but also from the Tantra. The method of Vedanta to the aim of the Tantra, and he says the element of Tantra plays a very, very strong part in Sri Aurobindo's yoga. The entire gamut of awakening of the chakras is a tantric process. Vedanta doesn't speak about it. In the Vedas, those things are hinted. But in Sri Aurobindo's yoga, it's very much there. It's part of the whole yoga where all these centers open and open in full bloom. And it's described in such a beautiful way in Savitri. How when they are touched by the descending current, of course in traditional Tantra or Kundalini, it is an ascending current. But in Sri Aurobindo's yoga, it's a descending current and people experience it. They experience this force, this grace descending, and sometimes their head begins to throb, the eyes begin to throb, this chakra begins to throb, the heartbeat, all kinds of things can happen, and it can go right up to the feet and below. So this is a very, very new element which is not found even in the Tantras, because Tantras, like the Vedas, also proceed step by step. So Vedas go through all the gods, and one god will take you to the other. It's like a relay. Then the second god will take you to the third to the fourth, and eventually the human consciousness will go towards immortality. And the mother says it's not required anymore. That period is over. That's why she called it the age of the overmind godheads. And they played a good role, great role, no doubt about it. And still it can be very inspiring to see how they have worked. And on the other side in Tantra, we again see through various forms of mandalas and symbols and mantras, one goddess, another goddess, they are being appeased one after another. And these gods and goddesses who are interwoven in the texture of the universe, and eventually they go to the highest form of the goddess, starting from the very lower goddess who is hidden inside darkness, Dhumavati, and taking to Tripur Sundari, the whole Das Mahavidya of the Tantra, where one after another the sadhaka ascends and eventually he is face to face with the All Beautiful. This was a path. Now, with Sri Aurobindo, one, lot of new material which had come to the human consciousness because of a new kind of experience in the last 5,000 years or 4,000 years, depending on how we place the year of Mahabharata, has come into the human consciousness. He has to integrate that. Lot of material discoveries have come. That has to be also integrated. And lot of new things have emerged. For instance, extreme degree of individualization. I find it very interesting why Sri Aurobindo speaks so much about the psychic being, which is hinted in the Upanishads and in the Gita, but not brought out to its fullness. And one reason is that the psychic being, the psychic consciousness which is present in everyone, but it has to develop through years, births and births after births, before it can develop into a psychic being. So, one way to look at it is that 5,000 years means even if I take 100 years of lifespan, as the Upanishad puts it, 5,000 divided by 100, see my mathematical mind playing with the incalculable, but nevertheless 50 births. Some souls that have gone through 50 births, to say the least, even taking give and take 5 years in between. This psychic consciousness, that which was like a monkey in the age of Rama, became like a soldier in the age of Krishna, and is now a developed psychic being because it has drawn from that experience. And there are many such psychic beings who are formed, who are waiting, who are ready for something new. They are standing at the critical door of making a choice, whether we quit creation through a doorway of escape, which has been advocated. I mean, even eventually the Tantra, traditional Tantra, even Gita would end with that state of liberation. Though liberation in that original sense did not mean cutting away the cycle of birth and death. That is a modern misunderstanding. But ultimate aim was liberation. Freedom from lower nature. Even in Tantra, though the path of Shakti and therefore enjoyment of Shakti as one goes from one level to another, but eventually the aim is that she would liberate you into Shivatva, into that ultimate mystery. But now, many souls have reached a point where they have to make this crucial choice. Liberation is fine. Is there something else that is possible? How about this earth? The human consciousness has become wide. Lot of, we are talking of globalization now. Sri Aurobindo in 1920s, when somebody asked him what are the signs that the supermind, the earth is ready for the supermind. One of the signs he gave is knowledge is burst beyond its seams and it's entered into territories which are occult, and it is one sign that the human consciousness is getting ready. It has become wide. You can't cabin it into small and narrow cults, sects, religions, formulas, formulations, and if one tries to do it, it will be cast aside. So this is another thing which has happened, that the human consciousness has become wider, and therefore we see in today's youth a cry which says, I need more space. Very natural, because actually their consciousness has become wider, whether we like it or not. They can very well integrate pizza with bhel puri, which, so tough for some of us. Last 14 years I've been traveling all across the world, but still I can't get rid of my basic preference for the Indian food. Whatever else I may get and I eat with samatha. But for today's children it's absolutely fine. I see Kian enjoying Indian food and I see a lot of Indian kids enjoying food anywhere. It's a very small sign that at the physical level it's happening spontaneously, because human consciousness has been enriched by another 5,000 years of experience. So Sri Aurobindo had this additional task that he has to integrate, and that we find in his writings. He integrates the entire materialism and the materialistic approach which came subsequently, and Gita speaks about it, hints that I am in essence in everything. But in what way? So the Gyan Vigyan Yoga is extended beyond the limits to include all these things. Even in atom there burns that fire, the Jad Agni. So Grahapati of the Vedas is now shown that even in atom the Grahapati is there. He is the one who builds the forms. It's known, it's the same truth but applied at a very wide level. Then the other part, as I said, bringing together the Vedanta and the Tantra. Not only that, for the first time we see in the history of avatars, that the mother aspect is placed in the forefront. All other avatars, the mother aspect is behind. Sita walks behind Rama. It is Rama who has to rescue her. And mind you, even though she is all powerful, she is so powerful that she tells Hanuman, I am so happy with you, you be immortal. And Hanuman becomes immortal. Now, she is not an ordinary woman. It's a misconception that Sita is a doormat and, poor Sita. Sita is not poor at all. Sita is capable of stopping Ravana by a blade of grass. When Ravana wants to touch her, she says, dare not come near me. She says, what do you mean? I dare not come near you? I have abducted you, kidnapped you. I am putting in like a dream dialogue, not exactly how it happened. But Sita would say, oh, that was by my own choice. Shakti has come into the Durg, into the fortress of darkness and ignorance. Why? So that this citadel may be destroyed. Look how interesting it is. Shakti goes into the depth of the darkness. And because she has gone there, it is doomed to be destroyed for a new creation. And she has the power to pick up a blade of grass and say, stop Ravana, dare not come near me. And yet Sita is waiting for Rama to come and shoot arrows and all this war and all this destruction. She is the one sitting quietly under the Ashoka tree. And the whole war is waging and raging outside. Armies are falling. Rakshasas are getting destroyed. By whose power? By the power of Sita. We see the same thing in the siege of Troy. Sri Aurobindo brings out so interestingly, beautifully. In the book of Parting, the other day we were reading, Helen tells Paris that it was wonderful when I met Menelaus, and it was wonderful when I crossed his house. It was wonderful when the keel of the ship took me with Paris here. And it's natural and right that empires be destroyed. Kali aspect comes out. We see the same thing in Mahabharata. That the Divine Mother, on one side, she is Radha, Anandamay, but she is never in the forefront. Yet Krishna dances to her tune. The world dances at the tune of Krishna, but Krishna dances to the tune of Radha. It's beautifully captured in one of the famous works, Geet Govindam. Somebody has read it? Has anyone read Geet Govindam? Jayadev. Amazing. Some of the images are amazing. Krishna is literally coming and falling at Radha's feet, saying, pardon me. And Radha is chastising him. Where did you vanish? Where did you disappear? And he's saying, I am sorry. I beg your pardon. Amazing work. It's full of rasa of the divine, and it has a great tantric element in it. It's actually a work of Tantra, Vaishnava Tantra, and if one has the insight, one sees it. If one doesn't have the insight, one will say, oh my God, this is such a romantic literature. One may totally misunderstand it. But I would strongly recommend those who really want to understand this play of Shakti and Shiva, but in another way, one should read Geet Govindam, and it's sheer delight. Jayadev's. It would be available, I'm sure, somewhere online. It's also available in a music form. But Radha is behind. Nobody sees Radha. Nobody knows whether Radha existed or not. But also we see, because the age demanded, the advent of Kali. So Draupadi is Kali. And imagine, Draupadi is shown again as helpless. She is staying behind. And armies are waging war. Again, Kshatriyas are being destroyed. And who is behind all this? Draupadi. It's very beautifully captured in one of the stories in Mahabharata, where, Dhritarashtra is mulling, how can we stop this war? Is there a way? He says, yes, there are 3 ways you can stop this war. How? Because he foresees that my children are going to die. So he says, kill Bhima, cut Draupadi's hair, and tie Krishna. So, Bhima may be killed. There are, warriors who can kill Bhima. Maybe they can plead Draupadi how to tie Krishna. Krishna says, I too can be tied by the cord of love. But Draupadi has taken it upon herself that no, this entire thing must be. Draupadi was the incarnation of Kali. Very few people know. And I'm so happy. It's not only Mahadeva, I would strongly recommend those who are interested in mythology, please watch the Mahabharata. And this aspect of Kali in Draupadi was shown very well. While Draupadi is being disrobed, on one side again very helpless. But that's the moment of apocalypse when the Kali steps out. And she says, whoever comes near me will be burned to ashes right now. Don't come near me. It's something very amazing and powerful. But again we see she is behind. In life of Buddha, all the avatars, there is beautiful stories of Buddha where at every time the eternal feminine comes and guides him the path. He is lost, he has practiced all kinds of practices. Traditional Buddhism doesn't acknowledge. Just like, as you said, Christianity. And yet every time, first Buddha goes away and then, Buddha has tried everything. He is not able to get how to really, what should I do? He is trying, but that ultimate reality is still eluding him. And then comes this lady and gives him something to eat and tells him, you know what is your problem? So Buddha says, what's my problem? I have come to solve the problem of people, but what's my problem? He says, I'll tell you what. You are stretching, and she gives a metaphor. If you stretch the string of the boat too hard, it will snap. If you keep it too loose and lax, you can't shoot an arrow with it. And Buddha gets the illumination. That's how the middle path is born. Look, it was, of course, the Divine Mother. She would not say that I am the Divine Mother. In the traditional stories, it is shown as one Devi came and, gave him food to eat. And then, he asked, how do I... Because he is fighting with nature. And nature has to show the way. He is trying to conquer nature and nature has to show the way. Then she gives another hint. Or rather, she inspires Buddha. And Buddha says, okay, if this is the right way, then when I put this bowl in river, may it flow upstream. This is a very symbolic thing. And as the story goes, it begins to flow upstream. Again, we find in the life of Raman Maharshi, very interestingly, how the divine feminine comes. I'm a little bit going in a different track from Sri Aurobindo's yoga, but it's part of it. The role of the Divine Mother. So some disciple recounted to Sri Aurobindo this well-known story. Raman Maharshi goes here and then, he gets restless. He sees a lot of people are surrounding him, so he wants to go into isolation. Every time he wants to go into isolation. Then once he is trying to cross Arunachal and go, somewhere else. Completely cut off from everybody. And he sees an old lady sitting there. And he says, Mother, please move out of my way. I have to go. And she tells him, why are you so restless all the time? Why don't you sit at one place and do the sadhana? He says, where should I go? Go to Arunachal. When this was asked to Sri Aurobindo, was it the Divine Mother? Sri Aurobindo says, yes, it was indeed the Divine Mother who came to show him the path. His error, his mistake. In Christianity, we talk about the mother of 7 sorrows. What are those 7 sorrows? Sri Aurobindo speaks of it in Savitri, hints at it. The mother of 7 sorrows bore. And when you read those 7 sorrows, it's amazing. Christ from birth, the birth of soul into an ignorant humanity, into an ignorant nature, and then his death, his crucifixion, all these wandering away. How she is bearing all these shocks, all these difficulties, and supporting Christ from behind. Again, not acknowledged. So it was enough. So, at some point, the time has come for the Divine Mother to step into the forefront. Why? Because now is the time for a new creation, and the new creation cannot come without the Divine Mother. sometimes I land up in very difficult situations. Normally when I go to bow down, I bow down to Mother, and for me Mother and Sri Aurobindo are one, so it's the same thing. So once somebody stumped me with a very difficult question or a very interesting question. He says, Dr. Sahab, sab theek hai, everything is fine. But I see that every time you go up to the dais, you bow down before Mother. Why don't you also bow down before Sri Aurobindo ji? So, I didn't know what to say. I said, well, Mother and Sri Aurobindo are one, and that's how Sri Aurobindo has put it. And Sri Aurobindo himself has said that when you turn to the Mother, only you get all my force. Or to put it, he says, Mother is Sri Aurobindo's force. But when you turn only to him, you get only 25%. So because that's the language people understand, 25%, 100%, this they understand. Then I also added, I have a very subtle bias, like all children, towards mothers. Because after all, Mother is Mother. So, and that's where we have that famous episode in Mahadeva. I was reminded of that episode when you were talking about Ardhanarishwar, which that vision is shown to Shringi Rishi, and he says, why should I bow down to Mother? Shiva is complete. And then, he tries everything and he takes the form of a beetle and goes around, and then Parvati says, okay, fine, enough is enough. You don't appreciate nature, so I withdraw nature from you, and he is a disembodied being. Without the help of nature, we cannot go beyond nature. This is an interesting secret Sri Aurobindo talks. In one of the early writings of Nolnida, he speaks about Sri Aurobindo's yoga as nature's own yoga. Sri Aurobindo reveals this. Nature is not an enemy. This concept was not only, it's very interesting what a parallel, as you said, inner life and outer life. Outer life, people started disrespecting nature. Everywhere, in India, my God, to the extent, there is ugliness, love for beauty has gone away. And the mother said it was one of the weapons of the Asura. It was an Asuric consciousness that, one shouldn't love beauty. Now, on inner life, what happened in the inner plane, people began to think that nature is my enemy and they must fight with it. So the entire yoga took this path. And amazingly, in one of the Hindi movies quite some time back, again, please watch it if you have not watched it. But what is the name? Chitralekha? Chitralekha. This is about a sannyasi, and there's a very beautiful song in it. Sansar se bhage firte ho, Bhagwan ko tum kya paoge. It's Chitralekha, right? Yeah, it's based on a very famous novel, of course. And in that movie, there are two lines of advance that two people take. One line through karma, through the path of being in life, engaged with life and action. And the other of sannyasa. But what kind of sannyasa? Where one thinks that nature has to be crushed out of existence, suppressed, denied. And then this lady is so touched by this sannyasi and says, wow. She follows him. Actually, it's a story of nature and the soul. And she is very much enamored. But in a nice way, because she turns to him that, he's such a spiritual man. And suddenly when he comes in contact with this woman who is beautiful, all film actresses are supposed to look like that. And he falls for her in a different way. Because all his life, he has suppressed the physical, vital, and suddenly when he sees face to face, and as the story goes, she says, my God, you are not the person whom I didn't love you this way. I loved your soul, the beauty of your soul. And then, of course, he's overtaken by all kinds of feelings and story. It ends beautifully. It's a very old movie, but Pradeep Kumar and Meena Kumari, but if you get a chance, please watch it. It's Ashok Kumar, yes, is the sannyasi. It's a lovely movie. One may not like it technically because nowadays, technology has gone very far. But in terms of conveying an idea, it's very powerful. So there was an idea, if we look 1,000 years back, not only the feminine was kept behind, she was barred even from entering the sanctum sanctorum. So much, she was to be shut inside the home. She was not supposed to, enter the sanctum sanctorum. She was someone inferior. She was regarded as a snare and a pitfall. That's how the medieval ascetics saw her. She is a snare on the path, a pitfall. Or worse still, pleasure. How crude notions can be. And Sri Aurobindo has a lovely aphorism to that. He says, the medieval ascetics thought that women were created as a snare and for the pitfall of men. And then he adds with this touch of ironical humor, one would think better both of God and of women. I mean, God creating women to ensnare men, how rubbish, and this is the idea which went. And that's why we see the monasteries. Even I have a very strange experience I must share, and this happens in the heartland of Hinduism, India, where there is a whole cult where women are not supposed to come near the head Swamiji, and I won't name, everybody knows, I am sure. And I had once an occasion to sit on the platform and share with one of the Swamijis, Brahmagyani, and this organization, a lot of money, by the way. And they have done some good job also in terms of some very nice exhibits. That's a different part of the story. So the moment the Swamiji was to come, suddenly there was a hustle bustle and all the women had to go behind and sit on the chairs behind. So I asked, what's this happening? No, women are not supposed to sit in front because Swamiji's drishti should not fall on them. He should not see. He's not supposed to see a woman. I said, what do you mean? I was absolutely shocked. I had never known before that such a thing exists anywhere in India. I said, is it? He said, yes, this is the way. So at that time, so you see in the talk, the half portion in front was lit where men were seated and the other half was in dark. That's how the lighting arrangement was. There was a women. I was looking at the expression of the women that how are they taking all this nonsense? They should get up and walk away. I couldn't resist when my turn came to speak and I had no choice but to say, we speak about Brahma Gyan and we have left out the Shakti of the Brahman. I mean, I was actually very furious, but peace. That's how. But it was really, you feel inspired. So this whole approach, and now here we see Sri Aurobindo for the first time, and this is the most crucial element. Without understanding this, just not possible to get at the central element of Sri Aurobindo's yoga. He places not only the Shakti in the front, gives her the entire charge of the new creation. It's not that, okay, she's also there and I'm also there. You are the one who will conduct. And we see this Sri Aurobindo doing repeatedly. First, when he comes and speaks of the Indian freedom movement, what was Sri Aurobindo's method? Look at how wonderfully the Lord worked. What was his way? Not just organizing meetings, committees and seminars. He simply wanted to awaken the Shakti of India. And he speaks about it. That Bande Matram. He turned it into a mantra. It was a mantra already. But he revitalized it by adding the force of his own spiritual consciousness. This is the mantra. India the mother. India the Shakti of millions. Re-establishing India as the mother. First act. And he knew once Indians regard her as the mother, the rest will be done. When Sri Aurobindo was asked, how will the unity come about? In India there is so much of problems, diversity. And he gives a very interesting solution. When Indians will regard India as the mother, in the consciousness of the mother they must unite, not superficially. And this thought has to go very strongly. And among the many things that we hope from the Modi ji's government, I do hope that Bande Matram will once again come up as a song, or not just a national song, it is, but also the national mantra. It will be revitalized once again, possibly sung in the parliament, and a song which must sink into the heart and soul of India. It's already there. So this is the first thing he does. It's the national yoga. He speaks of it as the national yoga with the Shakti. Then next, in the ashram context, devotees, disciples, and many activities, all of them have to be organized along the lines of the new consciousness. Once again, he steps behind to work on cosmic levels and places the Shakti in front. So we see very interestingly, if we read 1914 to 1920 Sri Aurobindo's writings, it's very easy, and that's what happens to many who want to only look at one aspect. They will say, oh, it is the same thing like Vedanta. Please, it's not. It is only between 1914 to 1920, before the mother has come fully and major works belong to that period. Sri Aurobindo refers to her but as Shakti. He speaks in the synthesis of Shakti, faith in Shakti, but not explicitly, because he's still waiting. In fact, he says in one of his letters, all my work was waiting for the mother's coming. All my realizations would have remained personal if the mother would not have come. They're waiting for the mother. So after 1920, when we see, very often when we don't read these writings in context, they can be so much misleading. One reads the Life Divine and says the mother is nowhere there, and Sri Aurobindo has spoken about the triple transformation. And I heard people give talks on Sri Aurobindo, proper Sri Aurobindonians, and they cut out the mother. Strange. There is no yoga of Sri Aurobindo without the mother. There is nothing like, and Sri Aurobindo said that very explicitly. What does he mean? That he is following my path when he cannot turn to the mother. There were people who were asked to leave the ashram because they could not accept the mother. And there is a famous instance of, let me not take the name, J. At one point, Sri Aurobindo tells him, if you cannot accept the mother, it is better for you to leave. Because you cannot do this yoga. She is the forefront. And again, when people said, okay, I accept the mother, but mother is inner and inward. This mother, okay, this is just a little embodiment, but the real mother is inside. See, Ramakrishna's yoga is so much leans on the mother. How she puts the transforming touch. We talk about this yoga a little later. Vivekananda, before he has that Shivatva in him. So he is like a yogi and tapasvi and, mighty, towering. When you read Vivekananda's writings, you feel, it is Mount Everest standing before you. And if he wants, he can smash the whole world into pieces. That's the kind of impression you get. Isn't it? The kind of strength and power. Leonine. This Swami Vivekananda, it's a lovely book, The Master as I Saw Him by Sister Nivedita, which describes some of his last years. The same Swami Vivekananda, when he goes to Shir Bhavani, it's a place of the Divine Mother in Kashmir. When he comes, Sister Nivedita says his mood had completely changed. Since he described what was his mood, he became like a child. He started seeing everything as mother, and he would even start singing, Mother, oh terrible, Mother, come to me. And that's when, within 2 years, because he started invoking Mother in her most terrible form, and he had a breakdown and he left the body. But after that, he never went out. All this vanished from him because he knew it is she who is doing everything. That realization dawned on him. So repeatedly we see in Sri Aurobindo, after 1920, a new note which is added to Sri Aurobindo's writings. And that note is the mother. One of the first books that came out was that wonderful mantric book which Dina was holding in her hands, which is a series of letters actually. It's not a book. Because people have started asking, who is the mother? What is her role? And Sri Aurobindo writes, do not judge her, because the mother has many sides. Many are her moods, many are vibhutis who do her work in the world. Even the Ishvara is formed by her. My God. Even the Ishvara, if he has to play with the creation and take birth, it is she who will prepare for him. This new note gets added. Post 1926, Whenever disciples would ask, what is to be done? Sri Aurobindo would not take him through the whole process of synthesis, ascent of the sacrifice, and a kind of inner bhakti, and he would simply say, open to the mother. Remain open to the mother. The mother is the beginning, the mother is the path, the mother is the end. Surrender to the mother. This is the whole essence of the yoga. I mean, there are such amazing letters. As if nothing needs to be done if one can do that. And you ask the mother, Mother, what should we do? Okay, he has referred us to you. Now what do you want us to do? Mother would tell us, be simple. Remain quiet. Keep yourself always open towards me. Do your work as well as you can. This is all, and be happy. This is another one. 5-pointed program. Panch Sutri Karyakram. What is that which she wants us to do? Be simple. Remain quiet. Not too much bug. Stay happy. Remain happy. Do your work as well as you can. Do it well, but to the best of your ability. And most important, keep yourself always open towards me. This is all that is demanded of you. Why? Because she is the mother. She knows us. The divine masculine or the eternal father, like all fathers. Oh, let him go out, let him face life. He'll grow tough. It's okay. When you have a problem, I'm there. He carries Papa's credit card and goes into the world. But on the side, mother gives him extra money and tells him, don't worry, I'll take care of you. It's amazing. That's why, because no power can rescue creation out of its ignorance and inertia. What tapasya can we as human beings do? We read things, we hear things, we wonderfully read many books on this yoga, that yoga, go to so many Swamijis, everybody gives us some way to do yoga. Honestly, how many do it? And how many realize it? Just look around. In the whole schools of religions, sects, cults, I have been to many ashramas, and I'm sure everybody has been. How many realized persons at the end of the day? Because it's so difficult to do with tapasya. Everything in human nature is as if so difficult, because the whole path has been twisted into that. You have to fight nature, struggle nature, everybody is sitting on nature. But there is another way to deal with nature. Nature herself will collaborate if we know that trick. And what she wants, after all, why doesn't nature allow the soul to escape? This is a question. Why is it doing all this drama? Because he says, no, please, I am also there we both will go together. Very often, people who get married and then say, she is my obstacle, and poor lady has to bear it. She cannot say, you are my obstacle actually. You go alone to ashram, you don't take me, and then you expect me to know everything about yoga. So I almost very often tell people, don't say such things, you bring her also. No, she doesn't understand. What do you mean she doesn't understand? She understands much better. There is a very well-known story of a couple who came along with their child to put in the ashram school, and the husband was all taken up by yoga and life divine and all that, like typical intellectual. Yes, this is the place. But he was doubtful about his wife. She was not much read. She used to only pray to Ambaji, Divine Mother. He doesn't know much. So when he would say, read Life Divine, he says, no, it's okay, I don't feel like reading. Anyways, I don't understand. He would say, what stupid woman I have married. She can't even share Life Divine with me, and all these thoughts. But then something happened down the year, that this man who had taken the resolve to stay, some ego bristled with people around, and he said, no, we are going. So he came and told the wife, pack your bags, we are leaving. He said, why? No, this has happened. She said, but I am not leaving. So what do you mean you are not leaving? If I am leaving, you are leaving. He said, no. And he doesn't know what to do. Asked the mother, he said, of course he should stay here. You go if you want to go. Now what this lady did was something very smart. She did not read all this Life Divine. But when she went in the queue to the Divine Mother, Darshan used to be there, she had read all about Amba. She had love for and bhakti for Ambaji, which is a form of the Divine Mother. One of the names of the Divine Mother. And she used to do her mantra. That's all her life was. So she stands in the queue and suddenly this thought comes to her. They say she is Divine Mother. Let me see if she is really the Divine Mother. So she starts calling Ambaji. And suddenly the mother stops all her work and looks at her. She says, oh my God, Then she goes a few more steps and maybe that was chance. Again she calls and again the mother stops the work and looks at her. 3 times she does it. Then when she stands face to face with the mother smiles and says, you want to know who I am? She is totally taken aback. Now there is no doubt left. Then she says, if I reveal myself to you, you will faint. She is convinced. That's all she needed. Nothing else. She was clear that I am at the right place. Life divine or no life divine. Dara used to write these doggerels. So one of the doggerels was, life divine, the mother's wine. It is out, let us shout. So interesting, no? See, life divine. You want to read it, understand it, one way. The other is what? What is life divine at the end of the day? The mother's wine. By all her sweetness and grace, the entire life divine can enter into us. It's not a joke, it's a reality. Everything can blossom just by her touch. Today, just now we read that she will free the godlike elements in you. We were reading in the Gita or referring to Devasuri Sampada. She will free. She is capable of freeing all these godlike elements. So nature wants to come with us. That's why in Sri Aurobindo's Yoga this new unique element is added. Not only liberation of the soul, but liberation of nature. You can't leave it. You can't say it is a chalna, it is a maya, it is something which is dark and it's an entanglement, ensnare, and I leave her and go. No, you have to carry her. She is the bride of Brahman. It is the sacred duty of each one of us to take her back to her original glory. She is none else but the Divine Mother who has worn this lesser form. That's why in the morning this is another distinction to be made, because very often when people say mother, so the Divine Mother is Prakriti. So why don't we live by nature? See how subtle the distinction can be. Sri Aurobindo says, yes, the Divine Mother is everything. But you have to make a distinction for practical purposes between this inferior nature, lower nature, and the higher nature. The Gita speaks about it, Paraprakriti, which in the morning we referred to. Now what is this lower nature? It is nothing else but a shadow of the higher nature. All the activities at the human level, whether activities of the head or the activities of the heart or the activities of the will, including activities even of the lowest aspects of nature. This is what Tantra recognizes, that even what is lowest and dark carries within it the seed of a divine possibility. And Sri Aurobindo also refers to that. Even so much that the body which has been formed by material nature, even that is a shadow and a symbol of something higher. Mother speaks of it that when she goes into her journey, she discovers what this human consciousness is. And that's why she has created human beings first time standing erect. They can look up to the sky, something amazing. The whole form of human beings is created by material nature for the sake of embodiment of the divine. How can we discard it? How can we reject it? But the line between blind acceptance or indulgence in lower nature, being moved by her, and between working to transform her is very thin. again we see the razor edge path. Every activity of human nature has to be connected to the Divine Mother so that her touch can transform. She has the original plan. Human love offered to the Divine Mother, she will change into divine love. Human reason, offer it to the Divine Mother, she will transform it to divine reason. Human imagination, offer it to the Divine Mother, she will transform it into the power of formative Maya, which is what originally it is. Human judgments, offer it to the Divine Mother, she will transform it into the divine vision, which sees things. Human action, choices, right, wrong, whole gamut, offer it to the Divine Mother, and the faculty, the goddess Dakshina, will awaken in us, inspiring us for the right action at the right moment. Human will, offer it to the Divine Mother, and she will change it into something of that will, that breath which drives the cosmos. So this is the path where not only we strive to liberate the soul from ignorance, but also our nature. That's why this yoga, even though there is the Vedantic element, proceeds in a different way. When people were asked, okay, fine, you have the Vedantic part, so let's first realize the Vedantic truth of the self. And unfortunately, one can misquote these letters. And then say, okay, after I have realized the self, then I will engage with the process of transformation. Sri Aurobindo says, no. Why? Because that process is different. You have to deny nature at many levels. And if you come back on nature, after that, you just cannot function. Because nature and the self, there is such an incompatibility. So you have to go together. And that makes this yoga so fascinating, so engaging, so complex, so many-sided. Because nature is many-sided. Bahurupini. That's how the Shruti says. Many forms, many aspects. And not only inner nature, human nature, even material nature. There was a very interesting message of the mother in 1958. O mother, material nature, thou hast consented to collaborate, and there is no limits to the splendor and joy of thy collaboration. So mother was asked, what does it mean material nature has agreed to collaborate? She so beautifully describes. What does material nature do apart from many other things? She builds forms. Now you see how interesting this yoga tends to become. She builds forms, including human form. Now these forms are built on an old pattern. It's like a hardware which is only up to a certain limit it can take. Certain windows can run on it, certain cannot, because it's up to a limit. That's why by the form we get limited. By the very fact that we enter into the human form, we take a lot of animality simply because that's how the human form has evolved out of that. So when Mother Nature will collaborate material nature, what she will do? Each coming form, she will put something of the new consciousness, integrate with it. She has accepted the new material. That's how Sri Aurobindo mother puts it. She has accepted the new consciousness and is now ready to add it to her creation. Which means now every form that is going to come on earth, every child that is going to come, we have two lovely children here. I mean, all of us are children, but two youngest of the young. Now every form, something of the new consciousness they are bringing. You can't help it. Look how wonderfully God's plan is. So we are worried about what may happen, what may happen. He's changing the very hardware. The new hardware is bound to go for the new software. It will ask for it. It won't accept the old stuff. So we don't have to worry. We have to just wait for the new children to come and invade this earth. Morning we had Narad read those lines. I saw the omnipotent's flaming pioneers come crowding down the amber stairs of birth. Out of the path of the morning star they came into the little room of mortal life. And how beautifully it ends. And look at that line. Prophetic, because that time material nature had not consented to collaborate. Body is made beautiful by the Spirit's light. in the old creation, the peak of spirituality was the image of the saint, sage, seer, made grotesque by the television serials. Every seer has to have a beard, I don't know why. Whether they were, no barbers or no razors, God knows why.
They didn't have time to shave.
They didn't have time to shave. Absorbed in meditation. They have to wear dhoti, God knows why. Okay, dhoti is a wonderful dress, for that matter. You can wear it in 70 ways. It's the most magnificent dress. I mean, I love it, though, maintaining it is difficult. But that apart, I mean, you can wear jeans and be a seer and sage. And even then, seer and sage and saint is not the peak of spiritual realization. It was so for the old world. That's why we see all this seer, sage, the Babajis posing, showing off. Their nature is showing up under the stress of new creation. Because olden times it was all right. When you live in a monastery, you are not tempted. But if you feign that now, we are great masters, and then you have to travel in aircraft all the way to America, that's when the sign of the real Baba comes out. And very few, Vivekananda is an extraordinary example, and of course Yoganandji and a couple of others. But for most, the ordinary humanity shows up. So the children are rejecting them. And very naturally, Babaji's now come home and, parents want children to come. Babaji aaye, paunch ho, I don't care. I remember and the Babaji who came home was really lovely person. He was involved when I was born and gave me a nice tabij. Really a Siddha Purush. When he came home and, I was asked to touch feet, I'm not going to touch feet just like that. Anybody's feet just because, he is wearing a dress and having jatas, miles long, almost up to that board. His jatas used to move when he would. So, today's children are going to reject. That's dated, expired. What is going to come? What is the aim of the Sri Aurobindo's yoga? He says, the aim of this yoga is not to become a yogi, tapasvi, or transformation is not about sainthood. So people just started wondering, what are you trying to create? And look at the lines in Savitri, he says, communicant and prophet and lover and king. It's a totally new aim that he has placed before us. Old aims were wonderful. This not to say that they have done a wonderful job. In the saint and the sage, the sacred traditions were preserved. Mankind could look up to a possibility that is embedded inside. But what we are going to have now is something much, much greater. Bodies made beautiful by the Spirit's light. Their tread one day shall change the suffering earth and justify the light on nature's face. Any quick questions? Yes, please.
You mentioned we need to embrace nature, and sometimes we read the opposite. So all that kept coming in my mind was how.
Yes, good question. I hinted through an act of offering, but before that, time out. That's right. We'll take this question maybe in the evening. But let me tell you. Let me just touch upon one thing, which not about this question. We'll take it up at length because really a beautiful question and needs not a summary dealing, but going into great detail. We'll talk about it. But more importantly, one more thing. Sri Aurobindo placed the mother in front and the whole yoga changed into remain psychically open to the mother. This became the mantra of the yoga. Sri Aurobindo did one more thing with the divine Shakti. Look how, what a nut I am that, repeatedly he was entering through so many ways, but I was just not able to see it. And thanks to your question, it came. Then when Sri Aurobindo was withdrawing behind the physical scene, he knew that yes, I have placed the Divine Mother in front, but not all are ready to tread the sunlit path. Many will say, oh, this is another cult, another religion. worship the Divine Mother form. Why should we do it? So, the same consciousness, the same truth, the same Shakti He placed before humanity in the form of Savitri. Of course, there is no comparison to Divine Mothers, those souls which can directly turn to her and tread the sunlit path. It's a special boon and privilege and blessing. But it's a fact that not all are ready. That surrender is too much for the human consciousness, for the average human consciousness. So in the form of Savitri, again the feminine, the same divine energy in the forefront of the human quest. And Mother put her own energy into it. Sri Aurobindo wrote it, and she says, all my experiences, I would experience at night and morning he would write it. But what is amazing is that not only her experience and everything, the Divine Mother, by reciting Savitri, by speaking about Savitri, she blessed it even further, charged it. It's like, that it is already mantric. But the beauty of Savitri is it has both Sri Aurobindo and the Mother's consciousness intertwined into one. The Mother read out many portions of Savitri, especially book 11, how beautifully. And she says, those just by reading Savitri, it can take you to the highest realizations of yoga, to the transformation which has been foreseen without the help of a living guide. This is her blessing on Savitri. So, this is the, I think, tea or something, ice cream, God knows what. He is saying, no. Something awaits us. Thank you so much.